The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Destination Mecca by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Chapter 16. Domes of Omdurman. I got to know the Qadi of Omdurman, the Muslim judge whose place in Islamic society combined religious and secular authority in matters of law. A strong supporter of Mahdism, he took me across the river to where the Mahdist stronghold sprawled. Though built from the rubble of old Khartoum, the streets of Omdurman are as much a contrast to the orderly modernity of the new capital as anything can be. This part of the country is steeped in history. We passed the famous gunboat Malik, whose guns destroyed the Mahdi's tomb by Kitchener's orders, now inoffensively moored beside the Governor-General's palace and converted into a yachting clubhouse. Sturdy, long-legged Sudanese, with white turbans and teeth gleaming against ebony faces, looked at us with the proud sternness that made me feel how perpetually close to the surface a man's feelings can be. No Arabian Reserve or hauteur here. At the junction of the twin Niles, the judge stopped his car. "Take a photograph of the wedding of the blue and white Niles. It should go well with your collection. It is symbolic of our country." The ways of the East were still with us, in spite of our motor transport. We stopped at cafe after cafe to sip tea or greet some old acquaintance, called in at the judge's mango grove to taste the new crop, talked of the future of the Sudan. At one stop, we were just getting out of the car when the judge pulled me urgently onto the ground beside him. As I crouched low, expecting an attempt on our lives at least, thundering feet passed in a cloud of dust. As the wildly running creature dwindled away into the distance, my companion laughed. "The governor's ostrich has escaped again." "But doesn't anyone stop him? They can kill you. They are dangerous." "No, because he is the governor's ostrich. He will come back eventually. In any case, he is going towards Omdurman, which is a sanctified place. Who am I to stop him?" Even religionists can have a sense of humor in the Sudan. We picked up an enthusiastic youth, now employed by the Mahdi Daira. He had been educated by the Mahdists, and his grandfather had been a Bayraktar, a standard-bearer, at Omdurman. His excited gestures and, I thought, over-statistical mind contrasted with the quiet humor of our mellow Qadi. For the rest of the journey he spoke volubly and with blazing eyes about the 4 million supporters of Sir Syed, the 10,000 graduates of Mahdist schools, the £50 million cotton crop, and the £24 million now being spent upon rural uplift and development plans. The Mahdi's silver-domed tomb rises majestically above an immense open, sanded space which is the mosque and parade ground of the Mahdi men. Demolished by the British after the rebellion, it is only recently that Sir Syed has been allowed to erect it again. It was, I noticed, surrounded by a stone wall and iron gates. Opposite it is the house of some members of the Mahdi entourage, containing relics of the time, the Mahdid, and a part of the original dome from the first tomb. I had permission to photograph the tomb from the outside. Then we went into the museum, with its collections of Mahdi knives and spears, patched cloaks of the dervishes, and guns captured during the attack on Omdurman. Without thinking, I levelled my camera at one of the exhibits, a carved blunderbuss with the name of Mahdi engraved upon the barrel. In a flash, my hand was jogged. "Sorry, no photographs." I was up against it again. We went for lunch with one of the Mahdist sheikhs of the town, eating the not-too-palatable gluey beans that are rather highly thought of, but must be an acquired taste, a soup of monkey nuts, and rice with various garnishings of vegetables and meat. This was the day of the great demonstration before the tomb, and the festival which follows the fasting month of Ramadan. Omdurman started to wake up. If I had been impressed by the shouting thousands before the Daira at Khartoum, I was overwhelmed by the marching and counter-marching of the teeming masses of white-robed stalwarts who turned out that afternoon to sing and cheer, to group and regroup, to parade their banners from Kordofan and Nuba, from north and south, before the shrine of their leader. Everyone was there. I went to pay my respects to the Mahdi in a tent where his eldest son, Syed Siddiq, immaculate in snowy turban, was making ready for his speech before 100,000 people. Sheikh el-Hindi, one of the most important leaders of the West Sudan, was there with his enthusiastic contingent, their camels and swordsmen, their banners and slogans. Only one thing was missing: music. Like the Wahhabis, and unlike their own opponents, the Marganists, the Mahdists consider bands and music to be bad form and irreligious. This was an excellent chance to get to know the real leaders, at least of this community, in the Sudan. I met the hereditary king of Dongola, who now represented his country as a member of parliament, the Speaker of the House, Judge Shangaiti, the ulema, or religious leaders, who had been with the first Mahdi on the field, and young Yahya el-Mahdi, the younger son of the chief, who was an undergraduate at Balliol. He lent me his car for the whole stay, complete with driver. I had been excused attending the mass prayers before the tomb, on the grounds that I might be allowed to take photographs of the outside of the building. While the sermon was in progress, I climbed to the top of the tomb, interpreting my permission rather widely, and got some very good shots of the concourse of Muslims bowing Meccawards. Then, after removing my shoes, I went into the actual interior of the tomb. The grave of the Mahdi is covered by a wooden, polished sarcophagus, rather to one side of the high chamber. On the other side is a large framed banner. This is the blood-stained standard of the Mahdi himself, and on it the words, "No God but Allah, and Muhammad his prophet. Muhammad the Mahdi, successor to the prophet of God." The shrine keeper, that venerable veteran of Omdurman, seemed to eye me narrowly. As is customary at the shrines of saints or kings, I lifted my hands in prayer and recited the first chapter of the Quran. The recitation seemed to reassure him a little, and he stood aside as I moved forward to face the sarcophagus. I could see that there was not enough light coming in through the stained glass windows to make sure of a sharp picture, and I did not have time to experiment. It might be now or never. I had my flash apparatus in the car and decided to go back and get it. Saluting the keeper, I walked slowly back to the car. This might cause a row. I might have got away with a hurried picture by existing light, but whatever would it look like if I went in there again, complete with a bulky flash apparatus, and started popping off bulbs all over the place? As I passed them, the 100,000 enthusiasts were deep in prayer. I did not want their disapproval to be unleashed upon me. I decided to use the element of surprise. 5 minutes later, I was back at the shrine. The aged one was nowhere to be seen, and a youthful minion let me inside the locked burial chamber. I thanked him, and knelt on the thickly carpeted floor, my back to the door. He left me to it. I took 3 midget flashbulbs out, put one in the gun, took aim at the sarcophagus, and pressed the button. It did not fire. Either I was in a place so holy that photographs could not be taken there, or else there was something wrong with the bulb. I took out another bulb and fixed it in the gun. It went off with a blinding flash. Still no sign of the ancient dervish. As I raised the camera for the 3rd time to get a good view of the blood-stained banner, I heard the voice of the old man muttering to himself as he entered the precincts. Instinctively, I looked back. He was standing and looking in my direction barely 2 yards away. I do not know why, but I probably could not readjust myself to changed conditions, and took the picture. The flash lighted the dim interior, brighter even than that of the blazing African day. Thoughts were chasing themselves through my mind. Would I be able to dash past him to freedom? Would a hue and cry be raised, and was the car still there for a quick getaway? Could I get the film out and allow the camera to be taken away and fob them off with that? I walked to the door and wished the shrine keeper peace. He made no attempt to stop me. I found out later that he was blind. For more than one reason, I decided that the time was ripe for a rapid move northwards, then east to Lebanon, a tranquil land. I blessed the aeroplane, former object of my malice. Chapter 17. Land of the Phoenicians. It is firmly believed by the people of the Lebanon that Noah, leaving the ark resting upon the towering heights of Ararat to the north, brought his folk and their animals to dwell in this lovely land between the mountains and the eastern Mediterranean. Here, too, came the Phoenicians, in one of those mass migrations not unusual in the east. Leaving their South Arabian homeland, they trekked to the Levant, making a new home among the glorious cedars and snow-capped mountains. The Lebanese Republic today is the result of a succession of historical events such as must be paralleled in few other lands. As the modern magic carpet glided over Beirut harbour, the sheer magic of the deep green sea, the gently sloping uplands, the fairy whiteness of the buildings all combined to create such an impression of sheer delight as I have never seen elsewhere. After sun-baked Omdurman, it beckoned, doubly fascinating. This, then, was one reason for the country having been a coveted prize of Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, and Turks. From here, the Phoenician merchant lords directed their trading ships to Africa, Egypt, and even far-off Britain. And today it is here that students of 60 nationalities come to study at the American University, in search of that knowledge whose tradition in the Lebanon has been unbroken for several thousand years. Christianity came early to the Lebanon. Today, with a Christian majority population, Lebanon is the only Arab land where the Prime Minister is, by tradition, of the Christian faith. On the wide, rolling plains stretching through Tyre and Sidon, southwards to Palestine, nomads graze their sheep and live the placid life of a people secure in their faith, organized into clans by that patriarchal system which is unchanged since biblical times. Yet modern progress has come, and unashamedly. Here you will find no grudging retreat before the advance of Western inventions. Rather do the modern Lebanese, like the Phoenicians themselves, take pride in exploiting every means to make life more fruitful, more in line with a people clearly dedicated to peace. I doubt whether there are many places as cosmopolitan as, for example, Beirut. Like most other Arab towns on the world's new highways of the air, the city teems with a variegated life, with colour, bustle, men and women of a score or more of nations. In one respect, though, the city has a life all its own. Whereas in Cairo, or Athens, or even Istanbul, one sees this kaleidoscope of nations as simply wayfarers, these many strange and intent figures of Beirut are native Lebanese. Some from the mountains, dressed in fur-lined boots and woolen cloaks, come from the redoubtable tribes of the Druze. Theirs is a heritage of war, of ceaseless guerrilla operations against the French, whose mandate expired after the Second World War, when Lebanon regained her independence. The tall, fair-skinned, athletic men in black and white turbans are the Kurds, whose origins have been traced on the wall tablets of Assyria, and who once ruled from Turkey to the Persian Gulf. Their pretender king now lives quietly in London, and Kurdistan remains split up between Iraq, Syria and Lebanon, Turkey and Persia. The main body of the people, of course, speak Arabic and dress in the Arab manner. They have their sheikhs and nobles, their black tents and herds of camels, true, Yet, in spite of this, their very differences from the peninsular Arab again brings to mind the question of what is an Arab. And the only answer is that given me by a Bedouin sheikh in Lebanon. An Arab, he said, gazing at me with clear blue eyes, his massive athletic frame contrasting greatly with that of my Saudi Arab companions, is a man, no matter his religion or appearance, who feels that he is an Arab, nothing more. As I sat in a cafe, watching the endless passing and repassing of these exotic figures against the background of an ultra-modern city, I could not but wonder how it was that such a people, of 3 races and at least 2 religions, could combine in such harmony, working and living together. How did they feel themselves to be a nation? If this seeming miracle could be accomplished here, was there some lesson that I could learn that might provide the key to half the world's minority problems, to the unending struggle of Arab against Jew, of Muslim against Hindu, of nation against nation, that seems endemic to the present time? I found, I believe, at least part of the answer in the famed American University of Beirut. When it was founded, as the Protestant college some 90 years ago, its first president, Dr. Bliss, laid down the principles which not only enabled this Christian organization to maintain its existence in the then Muslim Turkish Empire, but which has ever since provided the solvent of harmony in an Arab world of growing nationalistic exclusiveness. The college decided at once that it must concentrate upon the common ground between people and peoples. It also resolved to ignore the differences in opinion held by the students. As Daniel Bliss said, "This college is for all conditions and classes of men without regard to color, nationality, race, or religion. A man black, white, or yellow, Christian, Jew, Mohammedan, or heathen may enter and enjoy all the advantages of this institution for 3, 4, or 8 years and go out believing in one God, or many gods, or no God at all." At the same time, the sincerely convinced Christians who founded the university were not prepared to yield on their own beliefs. "But it will be impossible for anyone to continue with us for long without knowing what we believe to be the truth and our reasons for that belief." 9 decades have passed since the foundation of this amazing institution. During that time, men and women of almost every nationality have graduated here. Some of the past and present leaders of the Arab and Eastern world received their education at the AUB, as it is called. As I ascended the incline through the pines and cedars to the 50 buildings which now house the university, these thoughts were in my mind. Formerly just outside Beirut, the town has so encroached during recent years that the university, with its dominant position overlooking Beirut's enchanting bay, is almost a dominating feature of the skyline. The other outstanding landmark is a colossal statue of the Virgin Mary, patron saint of the Lebanon, which rears high above the city. At night, when the crown of this immense symbol is illuminated, its effect is striking indeed. Through the 70 acres of semi-tropical plants which comprise the college grounds I went. Below, spread out map-like before the Mediterranean foam, are the terraced slopes of gardens, running down to the vivid green of playing fields, and then the university's own swimming beach. Beirut claims that there is no other educational institution in the world in such an idyllic setting. I saw, chatting between lectures in the brilliant Beirut sun, students from 21 religious groups. Over 40 nationalities are represented among the 2,700 students here. The university is co-educational, and women as well as men travel great distances to earn the undoubted cachet of a Beirut degree. Nowadays, with the expanding East greatly in need of trained scientists, Beirut is one of the universities where the highest priority is being given to medicine, engineering, and social studies. My visit to the American University was what the Americans would call a high spot in my exploration of truly fascinating Lebanon. And yet, though it may be but a personal view, there seemed equal exhilaration in wandering, for a time, among the people of the countryside, talking with Bedouins and traders, shepherds and soldiers, housewives and children. This, to me, seemed the most rewarding. Our delight in conversation seemed mutual, though all too often I found people of the humbler kind rather too inclined to seek my views as a traveller, and not to give their own. This politeness is something characteristic of the Lebanese, and probably a result of the high tradition of ancient culture which is theirs. Earthquakes and conquest, the Crusades and the Turkish invasion have sadly depleted the country of its most ancient monuments. Few traces, for example, still exist of the great merchant king Hiram, king of Tyre, who was Solomon's partner in commercial enterprises. Today Tyre as a town is nothing remarkable, yet I could not but gaze upon it with something approaching homage. It was from here that the huge merchant fleets of Phoenicia sped forth to Egypt with timber, to Cornwall for tin, to establish glorious Carthage, and to Spain, Sardinia, and a dozen other places. 2,500 years have passed since that day, and though a traveller is, in the words of the greatest of all Arab travellers, Ibn Battuta, a traveller because he is imaginative, I stood there, near the ruined Crusader castles, watching herdsmen bringing home their sheep, and thinking of some of man's greatest dramas enacted on this stamping ground of the Assyrian and Babylonian hosts. Journeying northwards, again alongside the seaside strip, I sought out the once famed Isle of Ruat, now little known except by its local inhabitants. Associated with Alexander the Great, it lies a few miles off the coast, and is one of the very few truly Phoenician cities to survive. Indeed, under the Phoenicians, the island, named then Arvad, as the capital of the kingdom of the same name, extended its sway far into the interior of the mainland. Bleak and forbidding even in the mellow afternoon light, it is reached by Arab sailing boats, operated by sailors whose politeness is too great to ask the stranger's unaccountable reason for coming here. The men of Phoenicia had brought from somewhere, with a doggedness not unusual among the ancients, vast monolithic slabs with which to girdle the island's fortress. Many of these still stand, rising to 50 feet or more above the sea. Upon them was built a Crusader castle, which remained an unconquered outpost for a decade after the whole coast came under Saracen rule. Sallying forth from this impregnable stronghold, the Phoenicians founded a strange and nowadays almost eerie temple at Amrit, a little to the south on the mainland. Here rises the immense bulk of the Snail Tower, a huge black cube which represented the ancient Semitic goddess Astarte, later to be known as Aphrodite, and the Venus of the Romans. No trace now remains of the vast city which is said to have surrounded this strange sanctuary. In the gathering twilight, only the bare blackness of the cube dominates an uninviting landscape, where once great religious rites and processions must have taken place to honour the patroness of Phoenician might. Impressive though they are, these and other ruins are distinctly alien to Lebanese life today. In Egypt, for example, when I visited the Great Pyramid in the Valley of the Kings, local inhabitants showed in their pharaonic ancestors a pride that is reflected even in modern Cairo by a fumbling resurgence of that ancient architecture. The Lebanese seem to feel no such sensation. Neither are they, in a deep sense, somehow of the West. Yet both the modern West and the oldest of the Eastern Mediterranean civilizations meet here. Enigmatically perhaps, the people of modern Phoenicia seem determined to claim something different. Their outlook on life, if I have judged it aright, tends to be focused upon cultural and spiritual progress. When I remarked on this to a very analytically minded French professor who had spent most of his life in the Levant, he held that the Lebanese mind, like that of neighbouring Syria, was rooted in the wholly unique influence of the Holy Land. The pastoral and Bedouin character of the people, he felt, still holds those values which were esteemed by the visionaries of the Old Testament tribes. This may very well be true, for it is clearly not a racial attitude alone. The desert nomad of Arabia thinks very much in the same way as his fellow of Lebanon, even though they are of very distinctly different stock. I found the Lebanese delightful people, but decided it was time to head for Jordan and Jerusalem. This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.